The date is November 4th, 2001, less than 2 months after the worst terrorist attack on American ground. A city still in mourning, a country that desperately needed something to believe in, and the New York Yankees, baseball's most storied franchise, are 3 outs away from a 4th consecutive World Series title. Mariano Rivera, the greatest closer in baseball history, is on the mound. And then he blows it. The Yankees lose, the dynasty ends, and in the heartbreak of that moment, one player gets completely forgotten. A Hall of Fame career nearly erased from history. That player is Alfonso Soriano. And because Mariano Rivera couldn't close Game 7, Soriano didn't just lose a World Series ring. He may have lost his place in Cooperstown. Let's talk about what Alfonso Soriano actually did in his 16-year career. Because if you're judging him purely by Hall of Fame results, you'd think he was a fringe player. He got 6 votes, 1.5%, in his one and only year on the ballot and was immediately dropped. 6 votes. That's it for a guy with 412 career home runs, over 2,000 hits, a 500 career slugging percentage, 7 All-Star selections in 7 consecutive seasons spanning both the American and National League. The reason he got dismissed? One number, 28. That's his career B WAR, 28.6. And in the modern era of Hall of Fame voting, WAR has become the gatekeeper. But here's something that rarely gets mentioned in the WAR conversation. Alfonso Soriano was a second baseman. A second baseman who got traded to Washington and was told essentially, go play left field. He wasn't happy about it, but he did it. He was a team player, he made the move, and then he went out and hit 46 home runs and stole 41 bases in his first year in the outfield. Here's why that matters for the WAR argument specifically. 400 home runs at second base is an automatic Hall of Famer. That number would surpass recent nominee Jeff Kent as the most home runs by a second baseman. But because he agreed to switch positions, a selfless move, his defensive metrics took a hit transitioning to the outfield. WAR docked him for it, and now he's on the outside looking in. He did the right thing for his team, and instead of being the all-time home run leader at second base, he got punished. And then there's the number itself. When people cite Soriano's 28.6 WAR, they're citing Baseball Reference. But Fangraphs has him at 39 career WAR, an 11-point swing on the same player. That's not a small discrepancy. That's the difference between a fringe case and a legitimate conversation. At 39 F-WAR, Soriano is sitting higher than Hall of Famers Harold Baines, Bill Mazeroski, and George Kell, players whose plaques are already on the wall. So when someone tells you WAR disqualifies Alfonso Soriano, ask them which WAR they're using. And then ask them why it's the end of the conversation when it can't even agree with itself by 11 points. WAR is a tool, a great tool, but it's not the final verdict. And Alfonso Soriano deserves a deeper look than a single number allows. Soriano finished his career with 412 home runs and 289 stolen bases. You know many players in the history of Major League Baseball have hit 400 home runs and stolen 250 bases? 7. Barry Bonds, Willie Mays, Alex Rodriguez, Andre Dawson, Carlos Beltran, Gary Sheffield, and Alfonso Soriano. That is a list of Hall of Famers and players who would be Hall of Famers if their off-field situations were different. That is the company Soriano keeps by the traditional numbers voters used to care about and apparently forgot. In 2002, while playing second base for the Yankees, Soriano hit 300 with 39 home runs and 41 stolen bases. He led the American League in hits, runs, and stolen bases simultaneously. He finished 3rd in MVP voting. We're talking about one of the greatest players in the game in the midst of the steroid era. He followed that up in 2003 with 38 homers and 35 steals. Back-to-back 35-35 seasons as a middle infielder. In fact, that 2002 and 2003 season is the only consecutive 35 homer, 35 double, and 35 stolen base season in MLB history. We're talking about elite power and elite speed at second base, something rarely ever seen at the level that Soriano had produced. In fact, his 4 30-30 seasons ranked 3rd all time, trailing only Bobby and Barry Bonds, and 3 of those said seasons came as a second baseman. But it's 2006 where the legend really gets written. Soriano joins the Washington Nationals and does something only 3 players had ever done before. He hits 40 home runs and steals 40 bases in the same seasons. 46 homers, 41 stolen bases, 41 doubles. The 40-40-40 season. No player in baseball history has ever done that. Not one. Soriano existed at an intersection that has never been repeated. Only 8 players in MLB history have featured at least 35 home runs, 35 doubles, and 35 steals in a season. Soriano did that feat 3 times, the most ever. Nobody else in baseball history has even done the feat twice. Soriano stands alone in a category that nobody can match. He is also 3rd all-time in leadoff home runs with 54. And sure, you might not think that's an important stat, but I do. He set the tone and was one of the best, most prolific leadoff hitters the game has ever seen. At the 2004 All-Star Game, Soriano hit a 3-run homer and won MVP honors. His career 1.000 slugging percentage is the highest ever recorded in All-Star Game history with at least 14 at-bats, and he's 2nd all-time in All-Star Game history in OPS. And this comes at a time when the All-Star Game meant more than it ever has. It decided home field advantage for the World Series. So while on the surface this may feel like an empty calorie stat, it truly means something. When the best of baseball was giving it their all, Alfonso Soriano came out on top to the tunes of, well, quite literally the best All-Star Game slugging percentage ever. And by the time he got to Chicago, his speed has started to wane. But that didn't stop him from helping deliver a division title in 2007 and 2008. And during his tenure there from 2007 to 2013, he averaged 28 homers and a .497 slugging percentage. His time in Chicago and his time in Washington added Soriano into more elite company, becoming one of only 9 players in MLB history to achieve 1,000 hits in both the American and the National League. 5 of those 9 are Hall of Famers, and a 6th is a soon-to-be Hall of Famer, Albert Pujols. He also became the first player in MLB history to record 1,000 hits, 100 home runs, 500 RBI, and 100 stolen bases in both leagues. We always hear about the 500 home run club, like that's the automatic Hall of Fame threshold. But let's talk about the 400 home run club for a second. Only 59 players in the history of Major League Baseball have ever hit 400 or more home runs. In a sport that spans over 100 years, with approximately 23,700 plus players who have appeared in at least one game, 59 have done it. That is literally less than 0.25% of everyone who has ever played the game, and Alfonso Soriano is one of them. If the Hall of Fame exists to immortalize greatness and historic achievement, and it does, then a player who sits in the top 0.002% of all-time home run hitters has a legitimate argument. Soriano did something only 58 other players in over a century of baseball have ever done. That's not a borderline case. That's history. But now we need to talk about the real reason Alfonso Soriano should be a legend. Not just a Hall of Fame case, an actual universally recognized New York Yankees legend, and it all comes back to October and November of 2001. The city in New York was still broken. The country was desperate for something to feel good about, and the Yankees, New York's team, America's team in that moment, were going back to the World Series for the 4th straight time, chasing an unprecedented 4th consecutive title, a title that would have helped heal New York. It's not a stretch to say that basically the whole world wanted the Yankees to win, and Alfonso Soriano was the reason they almost did. But before we get into his World Series heroics, let's talk about the ALCS. The Yankees are up 2-0, and after a 14-3 beatdown, you could argue that Game 4 was a must-win. The last thing you wanted was the 116-win Seattle Mariners taking 2 in a row and momentum. A win for Seattle in Game 4, and who knows how the rest of history unfolds. So that leads us to the bottom of the 9th inning. Game tied 1-1, and who other than Alfonso Soriano. With the runner on first, he unloads an opposite field walk-off home run. In hindsight, it's easy to say it was a 5-game series and it wasn't even close. But ask the 1996 Atlanta Braves about momentum and the difference between being up 3-1 as opposed to 2-2. Because I promise you, the 116-win Seattle Mariners was not a team to play with. Soriano's postseason resume continued in the World Series, this time in Game 5. Bottom of the 11th inning, and once again, it's not a must-win game. But it kind of was, because a loss meant you had to win both games against Arizona at home against Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling, as opposed to just stealing one. That's a huge difference. There's a ball hit up the middle that should be a single, that should extend the inning and could ultimately change everything. But there's Soriano diving at second base, stopping multiple runs from scoring and keeping the Yankees' hopes alive. Now let's fast forward to the bottom of the 12th, where Alfonso Soriano smokes a single to right field, a walk-off hit. The Yankees win, their second walk-off in back-to-back nights, momentum on their sides going into Game 6. Alfonso Soriano single-handedly put the Yankees on his back in Game 5, and he didn't stop there. Fast forward to Game 7, the two best words in sports, the entire season on the line, a city in mourning, and at this point, Curt Schilling, one of the most dominant postseason pitchers in MLB history, had been cruising for the Diamondbacks. 7 innings of 1-run ball and 8 strikeouts to go along with it. And then Soriano strikes. In a 1-1 ball game on the road in the top of the 8th inning, Alfonso Soriano hits a go-ahead home run, a towering homer to deep left field. The Yankees lead, 2 innings away from a dynasty that doesn't end. 4 championships in a row at stake, and if Mariano Rivera holds that lead, Alfonso Soriano is your probable World Series MVP. He hit the go-ahead homer in Game 7 off Curt Schilling. He made the diving stop that saved Game 5 and walked it off in the 12th. Your likely, undeniable World Series MVP if that game ends the way it was supposed to, with Mariano Rivera closing the door. But he didn't, and the rest is history. And that's where it gets really interesting, because the ripple effects of that loss don't just change Soriano's legacy in New York, they change the entirety of his career. Think about what happens if Rivera closes Game 7. The Yankees win, Soriano wins World Series MVP, he is instantly immortalized in New York. He's not just a great player, he's a champion, the guy who had the biggest homer in a World Series chase for a 4th straight title, in a city that needed it more than any city in America at that point. You think the Yankees trade that player in the Alex Rodriguez deal? Not a chance. He's in the same conversation as Bernie Williams, Jorge Posada, Derek Jeter. He's one of the cornerstones of that franchise, and his number might eventually be retired at Monument Park. And in that scenario, Soriano becomes your all-time home run leader at second base in New York City with a game-winning home run in Game 7 of the World Series. But instead, Mariano blew Game 7. The Yankees fell short to the Marlins 2 years later, and Soriano gets traded. He bounces from Texas to Washington to Chicago. He has a brilliant career, absolutely. But he does it without a ring, without a dynasty, without that one defining moment that the general public uses to remember a player forever. And since he moved positions, he gets lost in time rather than immortalized, succumbing to a grand total of 6 Hall of Fame votes, disappearing from the ballot altogether. A true travesty. Alfonso Soriano is the only player in history to put up a 40-40-40 season. He is one of 7 players ever with 400 home runs and 250 stolen bases. He has the highest career all-star slugging percentage in history. He owns 3 of the 10 35-35-35 seasons ever recorded. Nobody else has more than 1. In today's game, the Hall of Fame conversation starts and ends with WAR. And while I think it's a fantastic stat, and I love that it can help elevate a case like Andrew Jones, I don't believe it should be used to hurt a player when the stat didn't exist or was not a primary focus during their playing career. Alfonso Soriano did things on a baseball field that no player before him has ever done. He belongs in Cooperstown, and the only reason this conversation is even a debate is because Mariano Rivera had one bad inning.